The machine screamed. 20 engineers circled it like priests around a silent god, confused, frustrated, defeated. One man silent, worn-out hat, steel in his eyes. He didn't have to fix anything. He didn't even have to speak. But he heard its voice and he knew. The day started like most others. Too early, too loud, too cold. Marcus Boyd pulled up outside Durwell Manufacturing, his truck coughing dust as it eased into the dock. The air smelled like metal and old ambition, a forgotten place once called revolutionary, now clinging to rust. He stepped out slow, boots scuffed, navy coveralls faded at the knees, palms already stained from loading crates by hand. Inside, the plant was buzzing, not with progress, but with frustration. A $20 million machine, custom-built, German, temperamental, had gone silent. For 4 days, it hadn't moved an inch. And 20 engineers, flown in from across 3 states, had failed to make it breathe. Marcus didn't know the specs. Didn't need them. All he heard was a rhythm, or the absence of IT, the loading dock. A young floor manager named Eddie was signing off the manifest. Marcus greeted him with a nod. Got the actuator coil, pressure valves, and 3 drives for Bay 9. Eddie barely looked up. Yeah, set it by the wall. They'll get it later. His voice wasn't cruel, just dismissive, like Marcus was furniture, expected to deliver and disappear. Inside the control room, Greg Talbot, head systems engineer, white mid-50s, expensive glasses that made him look smarter than he was, stood barking into a phone. I don't care what Berlin says. We've done the reset sequence twice. The board's still dead. He ended the call with a grunt, turned his team, and pointed at a blinking screen. Run a secondary diagnostic again. Loop the damn volt trace, if you have to. Marcus moved quietly, carried the parts in with care. He walked past a small team huddled around blueprints and coffee. None of them looked up. To them, he wasn't there. But as he passed a dead machine, towering, chrome-plated, elegant like a predator sleeping, he paused. IT had a hum once. A rhythm, like a heartbeat under steel. Now there was only a wheeze. A tiny skip, like it wanted to breathe, but couldn't. Marcus tilted his head. Listened. Narrowed his eyes. Something wasn't broken. It was jammed. Yo! Someone called. Doug, an engineer with a badge and an attitude, waved him off. You're in the way. Delivery guy. We're running heat signals. Marcus stepped back. Said nothing. But as he turned, his hand brushed against the casing. Noted the faint vibration. Irregular, off-cycle. He followed the pulse up the side. Found a service panel slightly ajar. Screws misaligned. IT wasn't mechanical. It was human. Somebody had installed a cooling module wrong. It was suffocating the main control feed. Marcus glanced toward the board, then back at the machine. He opened his mouth, then stopped, because he remembered. People like him don't tell engineers what's wrong. People like him just bring boxes and leave AT the far end. Laura Chun, a junior tech, mid-30s, Chinese-American, soft voice, sharper mind, was checking wiring. She noticed Marcus watching. You need something? She asked politely. Marcus hesitated. That panel's loose. You might want to check the coolant routing. Doug overheard. Oh, now the driver's a technician, he said, laughing. Coolant routing. That's cute. Others chuckled. Greg rolled his eyes. Let's let the professionals work, all right? Marcus nodded once. Said nothing more. He turned, walked back to the dock, and began unlatching the final crate. But Laura didn't laugh. She looked at the machine again, looked at the panel, then at Marcus's eyes, steady, calm, unbothered. She saw something the others didn't. Not arrogance. Certainty. Back at the console, alarms beeped again. Voltage fault. Cooling bypass error. Same dead loop. Greg slammed a palm against the desk. Someone called the Berlin office again. Laura stared at the panel and thought, maybe we're all just too loud to hear the quiet fix. Out at the loading dock, Marcus lit a cigarette with shaking hands. Not from nerves. From restraint. He had fixed bigger machines with duct tape and prayer. But here, behind steel walls and titles, his hands didn't matter. Only his uniform did. And that was the first failure of the day. Not the machine, but the people trusted to fix it. Inside the plant, tension hung thicker than heat. Engineers muttered reran tests, reset circuits, each new attempt digging the same grave deeper. The machine refused to breathe. And outside, the minutes bled into hours. Marcus stayed in the shadows. Loading dock, elbows on a crate. Watching, he had no clipboard, no badge, no seat at the table. Just a mind wired for motion, trained by years of wrenching open rusted engines, fixing hydraulic lifts with baling wire, listening to the language machines speak when no one else hears. Laura kept glancing toward the loose panel Marcus had mentioned. Something gnawed at her, a quiet intuition sharpened by doubt. Finally, she stood, walked toward the machine, ignored Doug's scoff. "You think the delivery guy spotted something the rest of us missed?" he said. Laura didn't answer. She was already on one knee, lifting the panel. There it was, a cooling valve lodged halfway shut. Hairline crack on the pressure seal, and one of the clips reversed. Rookie error. Subtle, easy to overlook, easy to dismiss if you weren't listening. She turned her head and looked toward the loading dock. Marcus was still there, still watching, like he knew she'd see it, like he was waiting, not for credit, but for justice to catch up. She stood and walked over. "Hey," she said softly, "how did you know about the panel?" Marcus shrugged. "Didn't. Just heard the pulse skip. That hum? Shouldn't sound like that. Thought maybe coolant starved." Laura nodded. "You were right." He didn't smile, didn't act proud, just said, "Glad you checked." Then turned back to work, like the moment didn't matter. But it did, because Laura walked back to the console and whispered something to Greg. "Are you serious?" Greg scoffed. "You're trusting a delivery driver's hunch over 20 certified engineers?" "He wasn't wrong," she replied. "The coolant feed's choking the primary. It explains the voltage drops." Greg folded his arms. "And you think he just guessed that?" "I think he heard what we couldn't." Greg rolled his eyes. "Fix it, then, if you're so sure." But Laura didn't flinch. She returned to the machine and began recalibrating the feed. Flushed the lines, realigned the valve, refastened the clips. Fingers steady, vision sharp. The others watched, half mocking, half curious. Then someone flipped the breaker. The machine paused, coughed, then hummed, soft, clean, alive at a long, lower fill the air. Not victory, not applause, just motion, reborn. Greg stared at the console. The red fault's gone. Cooling temp stable. Flow rates perfect. He didn't speak. Doug blinked hard. "Wait, that actually worked." Laura didn't answer. She walked back to the loading dock. Marcus had just finished tightening a strap. "It's running," she said. He nodded. "Figured. How'd you learn that stuff?" Marcus looked out past the crates, toward the skyline faded with heat. "My uncle ran a scrapyard. Everything we had was broken. If you wanted it to work, you learned to fix it. You ever think about applying here?" "I have." She tilted her head. "What happened?" He exhaled long, dry. "They said I didn't have the paperwork. No formal training. No degree. Just hands and history." Behind them, Greg approached. His voice low, forced polite. "Hey, Marcus, right?" Marcus turned. "That's me." Greg's hand hovered, unsure if it should reach for a shake. "Good ear. You got lucky." Marcus looked at him. "Nah, luck's when you don't know what you're doing." This was knowledge. Greg's mouth twitched. He didn't like the correction, but couldn't deny it. "Well, appreciate the help. We got it from here." Marcus nodded slowly. "Of course you do." He didn't say more. Didn't ask for anything. Didn't wait to be offered what should have been his years ago. He just walked to his truck. Laura watched him go, something unsettled in her chest. He hadn't just solved the problem. He'd revealed a system that couldn't hear its own heartbeat until a stranger walked in and named the silence. The machine didn't need credentials. It needed someone who listened. That night, the plant was quiet. The engineers packed up. Their charts were updated. Their problem solved. But none of their names would appear on a real blueprint of the solution. IT belonged to a man who'd worn gloves instead of gloves with logos. A man who didn't push to be seen. only waited for truth to be undeniable. And for Laura, that silence said more than any title ever could. The next morning, Marcus was back on the road before dawn. Same boots, same dust, same silence. The radio played low jazz, but his mind wasn't on the music. It was still on the machine, the one he fixed without permission, without invitation, without being wanted. The factory had sent an automatic receipt to his dispatcher. Delivery complete. No mention of the repair. No acknowledgement of what really happened. But he wasn't surprised. 20 years earlier, Marcus had applied to Beaumont Tech, an elite training program in industrial mechanics. He had no formal schooling past high school, but he sent in a portfolio of hand-built motors, salvage generators, even a modified AC compressor that ran on solar panels. The response came in 2 sentences. Impressive hands-on work. Unfortunately, not a fit for our program at this time. No interview. No feedback. Just a polite dismissal. His mentor, Old Man Rivers, a retired machinist from back in Memphis, had just chuckled when Marcus showed him the letter. "You too black, too blue collar, and too damn good," he said. "Scared folks don't promote what they can't control." Marcus had laughed then, but only because crying didn't help. He tried again over the years. Sent applications. Walked into job fairs where his hands were calloused, but his voice soft. They always smiled. Took his resume. Never called. Eventually, he stopped knocking. Started driving trucks instead. Delivering the very parts he once dreamed of designing. Ate a roadside diner that morning. Marcus sat sipping bitter coffee from a chipped cup. Beside him on the counter sat a wrinkled notepad filled with scribbled diagrams. His own sketches from memory. He had already drawn out the Durwell machine from yesterday. Not out of ego, but habit. He couldn't stop his brain from breaking things open. "Mind if I sit here?" Marcus looked up. It was Laura. She had tracked him down to the delivery log. Said she just wanted to talk. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he said. She smiled. "Neither did I. But I had a question." He waited. Laura leaned in. "How long have you been fixing things you weren't asked to fix?" Marcus exhaled. "Since I was 12. She paused, then pulled out her phone and showed him a screenshot. Internal plant memo system now stabilized. Fix attributed to team-led recalibration. No mention of external assistance. Marcus barely reacted. "You expected credit?" she asked. "No," he said without bitterness. "I expected the truth. But I've learned those two don't always walk together." At Durweld, Greg was giving a presentation to regional leadership. Polished slides. Big words. Our team diagnosed and resolved the system error using revised coolant regulation protocols. The room nodded. The higher-ups clapped. He didn't mention Marcus. Didn't mention Laura's intervention. He had rewritten the moment, as history often does when it's written by comfort. Back at the diner, Laura put away her phone. "Would you ever work in a place like Durweld?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Maybe, if I didn't have to wear a mask to be heard." She nodded slowly. "What if the system was willing to listen?" Marcus looked out the window. Morning light cut through the truck's windshield in hard, golden lines. "Systems don't listen," he said. "People do. And most people, they only hear you if you look like their idea of smart." He didn't say it in anger. Just truth, plain. Sharp, unbending in a small office at corporate. An HR manager scanned old resumes for a diversity initiative. She skipped over one marked M. Boy, too old, too overqualified. Not enough letters after his name. Trash bin. No second thought. Laura watched Marcus pack up his notebook. She saw the way his hand lingered on the pages, his diagrams, his thoughts, his worth. "You're better than all of them," she said quietly as he looked at her. "I don't need to be better. I just want to be treated the same." Then he tipped his head, walked to the door, and disappeared into sunlight. And once again, a man with brilliance in his bones faded into the background, because the world had no form to fit him in. 3 days later, Durwell's central line stalled again, but this time, the machine wasn't the problem. It was the people. Laura stood by the console, jaw tight, staring at Greg's smug face as he repeated the story in front of the executive board. After recalibrating the internal coolant system, our engineering team restored full function. This proves the effectiveness of our in-house protocols. She could barely believe it, and no mention of Marcus. No mention of the error he spotted. No mention of how truth had been rerouted just like the wires. Clean on paper, corrupt in reality, point one of the VPs asked. Was this incident preventable? Greg nodded. Yes. Had our external delivery partners stuck to scheduled drop windows, we might have caught the timing delay earlier. Laura felt her hands curl into fists. He wasn't just erasing Marcus. He was blaming him. That night, she sent a quiet email to Durowell's legal ethics team. Attached, her recorded conversation with Marcus, timestamp machine logs, and a picture of the misaligned coolant module taken before the fix. She didn't expect applause. She expected fallout. The next morning, Marcus was out on his usual route, back roads and warehouses, when he got a call from a block number. "Mr. Boyd," said a clipped voice. "This is Pamela Sandberg, corporate counsel at Durowell. We'd like to discuss a recent incident involving your last delivery." His voice stayed calm. "Which part?" "The part where you allegedly tampered with proprietary equipment." He stopped walking. "I didn't tamper with anything. I observed a fault and mentioned it. Our logs indicate you were not authorized to operate or advise on that equipment. We're opening a formal investigation." There it was, not an offer, not a thank you, not a threat. Marcus sat in his truck for a long time after the call. The coffee in his cup had gone cold, but the heat in his chest hadn't. They weren't just ignoring him. They were coming for him. And all he did was be right. Back at Durowell, HR had received a second memo. This one wasn't private and an anonymous whistleblower. Actually, Laura had submitted the full sequence of events. Suddenly, the tone shifted. Greg was called into a review panel. He fumbled under pressure, denied ever having spoken with Marcus directly. But he never touched the machine, correct? Greg hesitated. He may have offered suggestion. And you ignored it? Greg's silence answered for him. Meanwhile, Marcus received another call. This time, from someone unexpected. CEO Thomas Raines, a black man who had climbed the corporate world with the same quiet grace Marcus wore on his face. "I read the file." Raines said over speakerphone, "You're not just a delivery guy. You're a systems mind with no seat at the table." Marcus chuckled softly. "That's how it's always been." "I want to meet." 2 days later, Marcus walked to the glass doors of Durowell HQ, not with badge, but with presence. He wore no suit, still had grease under his nails. But the room went silent. Raines stood and extended a hand. "Marcus." "Sir." They sat across from each other like mirror images. Two black men shaped by two very different systems. One let in, one shut out. "You understand more than our team does," Raines said. "That machine you helped fix? It's being repurposed for high-security contracts. Your insight could save us millions." Marcus looked out the window, then back. "I didn't ask for this meeting." "I know. I didn't ask for recognition." "I know that too. Then why now?" Raines answered without pause. "Because someone else made noise, and that's what it takes for people like you to be heard." The conversation ended in silence. No job offer. No promise. Just understanding. But sometimes that's how revolutions start. Not with fire. With a man in work boots walking into a glass building and refusing to shrink. Later that week, Greg was removed from the engineering lead. A press release reshaped the narrative, vaguely crediting external support and collaborative discovery. But the name Marcus Boyd never made it in print. Still, those who mattered, they knew. And some stories don't need headlines. Just whispers pass from one young tech to the next. They say a machine is only as smart as the people running it. But sometimes it takes the man who delivers the parts to remind the machine who really keeps it alive. 2 weeks passed. And in that time, nothing and everything changed. Marcus kept delivering, kept driving the same roads. But whispers moved faster than traffic. A blog post by a junior engineer had gone live. The man who fixed what we couldn't. No name, just a story, a machine, a man with grease on his hands and genius in his silence. It wasn't viral. Not yet, but it reached inboxes inside Durweld, then other factories, then LinkedIn, then the inbox of a local journalist named Keisha Rollins, who didn't just cover tech. She covered truth. She read it, paused, then asked a question no one else had. Why did 20 engineers miss what a delivery driver saw in 5 seconds? She tracked Marcus down outside a drop site in Oakland. He was unloading crates when she approached, camera off, notebook closed. You're the man from the blog, aren't you? He turned slowly. I'm a delivery driver. I know. And they called Einstein a patent clerk. He smirked, eyes narrowed. You trying to write a story? I'm trying to correct one. Later that day, the article dropped. Brilliance in the background. The delivery driver who diagnosed what experts miss. Marcus's name was right there in bold. Not buried. Not forgotten. Front and center. Within hours, it spread. Tech forums. Engineer threads. Equity think tanks. Some praised. Some pushback. But the video embedded halfway down, the one Laura finally leaked, it showed Marcus pointing quietly to the open panel. No mic, no speech, just motion. And in that silence, the world finally listened. Back at Durweld, boardroom lights flickered over pale faces. Greg's former colleagues scrambled to reshape their statements. Raines, the CEO, was calm as stone. He called Laura into his office. You knew who he was before anyone else did. She nodded. I just listened. You know what that means, right? She blinked. You're ready for the job, Greg thought only he could hold. Meanwhile, Marcus sat alone in his truck, phone vibrating nonstop. Voicemails, emails, interview requests, offers to consult. Even one from a university offering to pay him to speak to students on intuitive mechanics and machine empathy. He let it all buzz, then picked up a call from one person who never asked for anything. His mother. You all over the internet, baby, she said, proud but puzzled. They talking like you discovered fire. Marcus laughed quietly. I just saw what they didn't. You always saw more. Since you were a boy fixing your cousin's bike with twine and chicken wire. He looked out over the freeway. The sky orange with dusk. I thought they'd never see me, Ma. Her voice softened. They still don't. Not all the way. But this time they had to admit it. Later that week, Marcus stood inside a high school gymnasium. Not for a press conference. For a career day. He spoke without a microphone. No slides. No PR handlers. Just stood there in boots and said, people think you gotta wear a suit to be smart. Truth is, your hands know things books ain't caught up to yet. A kid in the front row whispered, he fixed $1 million machine. Another said, he looks like my uncle. A third, he looks like me. That night, Marcus sat on his porch, moonlight pooling on the railing, notebook on his lap. Inside were new designs, sketched not for profit but for a purpose. A modular valve system, a frictionless gear redesign, a new blueprint for something that didn't yet exist. He wasn't waiting for approval anymore. If the world won't make room for you, you carve it yourself. At the Durweld plant, Laura's nameplate now read Director of Technical Systems. And in her first official meeting, she made a quiet change. A mural on the break room wall, previously blank, now bore a quote. Some men saw with silence. Listen harder. MB, no fanfare, no ribbon. But every engineer who walked past it, they knew exactly what it meant. The world didn't change overnight, but it had to look at itself, just long enough to flinch. The article kept spreading, not in headlines, but in inboxes, boardrooms, and forwarded links with subject lines like, this is what we're missing. Read this before tomorrow's diversity talk. This guy deserves more. Marcus never responded to fame. Didn't accept the university lecture offers. Didn't take the 6-figure consulting gigs sent to his email with subject lines that screamed validation. He kept driving. Same route, same jacket, same silence. Because Marcus wasn't chasing spotlight. He just wanted what most men like him never get, to be believed the first time. At the next quarterly shareholder meeting, Raines spoke in calm, measured tones. He didn't mention Greg, didn't point fingers. He just told a story, about a man in coveralls, a broken machine, and a truth buried under assumption. You want innovation? Rain said, start listening to the people no one ever listens to. Some executives shifted in their chairs. One even scribbled something like, start local genius initiative? But Marcus? He was done being someone's bullet point. One afternoon, he pulled into a rural job site where a forklift had jammed against a hydraulic stack. Two site supervisors stood scratching their heads. Engineers said, we need a new lift line, one muttered. Marcus walked up, glanced at the pressure pipe, and said, crimps loose. Give me a crescent wrench and 10 minutes. They hesitated. You sure? He didn't answer. Just kneeled down, tool in hand, jacket creased from years of work no one celebrated. 8 minutes later, the lift hissed and rose smooth as breath. They clapped him on the back, called him a lifesaver. He didn't smile, just nodded and moved on. Back at home, Marcus stood outside his garage. Inside was more than tools. It was a sanctuary, shelves of blueprints, machines he'd reimagined from scratch, hand-built prototypes the world hadn't seen. On one shelf sat a framed note from a student. You made me want to fix things. Not for money, for meaning. Across town, Laura was speaking on a panel at an engineering expo. Someone asked about innovation. She said, it's not just code and math. Sometimes it's listening to the man who speaks in motion instead of words. Durweld's hallway still echoed with politics. But by the service entrance, beside the time clock, a new plaque had been quietly mounted, in honor of the ones who were right, long before we allowed them to be. No name, but every worker who passed by, especially the ones with dirt under their nails, knew exactly who it was for. Marcus never called himself a genius. He knew what real genius was. A boy who learned to fix broken bikes with duct tape. A man who saved million-dollar machines without touching a keyboard. A mind built from silence, trained by struggle and tuned by injustice. One evening, on a school chalkboard where Marcus had been invited to teach a free workshop, he wrote just one sentence. If they don't open the door, build your own wall, then wire it with wisdom. And below it, MB, he walked out under a sky full of clouds and humming traffic. The world hadn't changed, but it had heard him. And sometimes, that's louder than any machine. Respect isn't earned through titles. It's revealed through truth that refuses to stay quiet.